All right, so team, welcome to the QA plus manual testing orientation session. I know you have been given an introduction to the different programs that we handle, kind of level 0, level 1, which are kind of explained by Karthik in multiple videos. So this is part of the like level 0 kind of a program, so which kind of covers the manual testing and the QA tools. The idea here is that we will walk you through different QA testing processes. Basically, like what exactly the manual testing QA is all about. Understanding the different software systems. Like the best thing, like before we get into the tools and everything, we're going to go through a lot of manual things like software development lifecycle, understanding what is quality assurance, quality control, different software, development life cycles like Waterfall and uh, Agile, which is predominantly the Agile is the one that is getting used. So we'll talk about that. Software testing life cycle, which is again very important and kind of involves in different phases of it. We'll walk you through testing methodologies, different testing types, and understanding functional, non-functional testing. And then we'll go into a couple of tools. For example, with the IT Learn has built a tool called AnyAUT tool, which is used for both manual testing as well as in automation testing using Selenium. So we'll walk through the tool and we'll understand how do we write the test cases there. Before we actually get into full-fledged automation testing, that is Selenium with Java or a Python. We'll also go through defect triaging, defect management, reporting, etc. So this is a kind of through practical. We're going to spend a lot of time in test case development, test case design, which is the core deliverable from a QA, or a tester that is expected out of an industry. So before we get into all these things, I want to have a quick little more details about the attendance over here. So I'm just going to kind of raise a poll, just see if you can answer that. In fact, I would encourage each of you to answer this so that I'll get to know better who you are, whether you're a beginner to the IT or you already have some significant knowledge in the IT. Or you might have just done some training, but you're waiting for the job. So those kind of things. So please take some time and do answer these questions. I see still there is scope for 7% of people. So we'll close this poll in another 5 seconds. So just take an option. All right, so I'm closing this. So I see that 8% of you basically absolute beginners to the IT, and then 31% some IT but not significant at all, and 23% says IT trained, and but not really getting the jobs, and there are about 38% of the people already working in IT. So this is a good mix. Like we have beginners, we have some IT, but not really significantly working on it, and some we have trained and really maybe looking forward for getting a job, and 38%, which is a big chunk again, already kind of working. But either of the ways, so we'll go through all these topics very in detail starting from today itself. We'll try to go through the QA/QC fundamentals, development lifecycle as much as possible. Just one more question before I proceed, basically to understand, with respect to the IT ELAN membership, like do you have already a QA Selenium member or JPack member, or maybe any other course that you have joined with the IT ELAN? Just quick yes, no, or planning to be will help. Some of these acronyms like JPACT and all, people who are with the IT learn for some time would understand, like job placement assistance and, certification kind of training. All right, I'm just closing this in next 5 seconds. So still in case if somebody not yet answered. All right. So I see that 40% no and kind of 40% planning to be, and then 20% of the members are already from this attendance list. We have a huge number of membership, which is also getting renewed over this point of the time. That's already there. But from the audience that you're attending today, close to 20 people, I see 40% aware of IT-Learn, but they're not members, and 40% are planning to be, 20% are already members. So, like, okay, this is what I can do. Can you all see the results? All right. Okay, so some people just have wrongly selected. So it's a simple question, guys, like yes, no, and to be, and one of the options that you would have chosen. Okay. Anyway, that's fine. That's fine for now. Just want to show you the previous one as well. This is what people have talked about for the beginners of IT or some IT trained, 30% working. All right. So cool. Uh, So when it comes to the absolutely, like even if somebody says I'm already working in IT, is it like already in software QA? That's another question that I just wanted to take for those 38% of the people. Are you already working in QA, or you are into some of the operation side and want to get into a software testing? Because I do see a lot of people already working, but they're not into the core IT development or testing. They may be like supporting some programs or supporting some projects, and now the path that they wanted to choose is to get into the testing and then from there take off. So can I just know about those 38% of the people working in IT? Means they are into the core IT software development testing, or a different category of jobs? You can put it in the chat. I don't have a poll for it. Just put it in the chat. Okay, project management. Okay, somebody is into project management. I've not expected this answer, but that's well and good. Anyway, so maybe let's assume they are into some software operations, or maybe supporting, maybe automation development. So cool. Okay, so this will be definitely a recap for you. While doing an automation, you should understand the different categories of the test cases, and things like how do you going to categorize your the regression suite. For example, you may be categorizing the regression suite into, like, ideally your automation suite into something like this: a sanity test and a regression test, and you should have something like an end-to-end or a system test. uh, to know some of those details, these fundamentals will help you what exactly mean by sanity, what is regression, what is end-to-end, and which of the test cases that I need to kind of categorize. Anyway, so when it comes to the QA fundamentals, these are the main things that I can, based on my experience and what you really need to know, is that still even today, a lot of people uses these words very interchangeably. One is like quality assurance and quality control. A lot of people say I'm a QA, but it's actually very different. Quality assurance is very different. Quality control is different. Any quick thoughts on what exactly? So these are the main things that we're going to do in the upcoming 10 to 15 sessions. When I'm saying 10 to 15 sessions, 10 will be purely on these concepts and the kind of practices on test case writing. And the remaining one, we are going to get into these AnyAUT test management tool that we have built in the Workasa. We are also going to use the tools like JIRA for your defect management and agile management. And we have even tools like Trello for your project management. We are also going to understand the different forms of softwares like web applications. Windows applications are very, very less, but still we'll understand what are those Windows applications. And then we'll talk through about mobile applications, etc. And as before, as a manual QA, you need to even know kind of troubleshooting and where does the logs gets generated when you identify a bug. For that matter, you need to know a bit of fundamentals of how web development happens or how API development happens. So we need to get into some of those details. And before we start with the full-fledged automation, obviously, we'll give a detailed introduction to the automation testing and how do we work through different tools that we have like IDEs and Selenium IDE, Katalon IDE, understanding few of the important things like XPath, CSS, how it generates. So this is more of setting tone for the automation point of view. But when you talk about from a pure QA manual testing, if anybody is looking for that kind of a job, just want to get into an IT and start with the manual testing. Let me also tell you one more thing. Like today, software testing jobs majorly of it's a mixed of manual plus automation. If you just say that even though they're going to get you only into manual testing job, you still need to have sufficient knowledge of automation as well to get through interviews at least. You cannot just say that I'm a pure manual test engineer and I'm looking forward for a job. You may find it, but the kind of options are a bit less. So the best way to get it is like, have a sufficient knowledge on automation side. At least it's like a future ready. So if they have a plan to automate it, then you are kind of already have the sufficient knowledge. And for that matter, in the next 1 hour, we have an automation introduction as well. So I would encourage people to join, especially for the people who already know manual testing, or even I would suggest to parallelly attend both, so that in the sufficient time that you have, you can actually take up both. So we'll talk more about the automation and the intro, all that in the next 1 hour. So coming back to here, when it comes to the QA fundamentals, these are the main things that you need to know, like understanding what is quality assurance versus quality control. What are the different software development life cycles that we have? Most of the companies as of today, I can say around 60 to 70% of the companies will use the different forms of agile, which is a quick delivery method, like a 2 weeks of a sprint, 4 weeks of a sprint, maximum of 6 week sprint. But there are definitely few companies still using waterfall, which is like a very traditional, but still holds good for today for a couple of products. And that is also, they have redefined it in such a way that it's like a mini waterfall model, they call it as. And usually this will go for about 3 months, generally 3 months period of time. And if really we find anything, the project is going on for 6 months to 1 year, those are like very, very rare. But if you take in the scenario like 10 years back, most of the projects are like waterfall, used to run for minimum of 1 year, 6 months, 1 year, sometimes a 2 years project. But you won't find that kind of scenarios today because of the speedy, kind of delivery expectations from the customer. So we're going to understand these two models in detail and what happens in these models at each phase of the life cycle. For example, in a waterfall model, like, we'll have a requirements gathering, we'll have a design or, kind of low level design and high level design happens. And then we get into development. Even though the testing phase comes little later, we expect the testers to be present in each phase of the life cycle, and there is a clearly defined roles and responsibilities in each phase of the life cycle. So we'll understand all that more in detail. And then we get into agile model. Well, and obviously, since it's very important, and as of today, whatever the jobs that you mostly going to get it, you will definitely land up in an agile. It's 90% of the chance. So we're going to understand more in detail about agile, like what are the different sprints, how it happens for a 4 weeks, 2 weeks. You will even see some of the agile companies are actually delivering it like a weekly. So Monday they will start, and by Friday they will deliver some features to the customer. And there are some companies which will start in the morning and actually deliver by evening something to the customer. So it depending on the uh, kind of dynamic nature of the application. So when we get into agile, we need to understand a lot of things like what is a product backlog is all about, what is an epic is all about, and what are the different roles, like the kind of team that comprises in the Scrum team, or the sprint team is very different from the traditional waterfall model. So you will hear different terminologies like product owner, you'll hear about Scrum master, and then there is a Scrum team of 7 to 9 people. So we'll understand about everybody's role, and I see a good progress on the Scrum Master side. There are a lot of people coming from QA, kind of getting that certification done, and they are becoming Scrum Masters and trying to earn a little bit more than a QA. Because it's very natural. As a QA, you will have more knowledge about the product compared to a development guy, because the roles and responsibilities, if you look at it traditionally, or largely, if you look at any company, they will try to have for each module, you'll be having one developer. So when I say that, let's say you have a project with different modules, let's say M1, M2, and there are n number of modules. Uh, Depending on the life cycle and the timelines, etc., there will be n number of developers working, like developer one for module one and developer two for module two. Similarly, maybe three or four developers working on these three or four modules. And general ratio, it's again, don't take it 100%, but the general thumb rule or a ratio is that you'll find about one QA or one tester for a project that consisting of like three developers. And this is not 100% true in all the companies, but largely we can say that. I have seen and I have worked totally in the reverse cases as well, where there's a one developer, but we need it's one developer and we need three testers to test it. The reason that it's, for example, it's a small change in the project or a small enhancement in the application, but we have many systems that are getting impacted. Many different operating systems gets impacted, and it's on the website, on the different browsers that gets impacted. And we have the same thing is going to impact on the mobile side, so we have to test it on mobile. And our application is available in like many different languages. It's basically localized into different countries and the different uh, region languages, so we need to test it and all of that. Considering all that, the small change can be done by one developer, but I would need a three or four testers to test it and sign off. So you will find a reverse scenarios as well, but largely if you go, this is what you'll find it mostly, like not for a 2 to 3 developers team, you'll find one QA. So if that is consideration, if you say, let's say there are three developers working on this, and if you have just one QA, obviously this person will have a knowledge on the entire system, and he will have a better knowledge on all these integration points and how system works end to end, from from the entry point to the exit point. And he will have a complete understanding of the flow, the business logic, the business flow. And naturally it evolves that people from the QA are more getting into project management, or more getting into the Scrum Master roles. Now, there are some certifications, and if you can, I mean, it's just not the certification. Of course, first is to get the knowledge of your system and the product, and then go do about certified Scrum Master kind of certifications, and that naturally gets you into these roles. Okay, so that's one of the advantage of being QA and having full knowledge of the system compared to the individual developers working on each of these individual modules. And eventually in the Agile Scrum, you can even become like a product owner kind of a role, and from there you can even become like a business analyst kind of a role. So this is all I'm talking about over a period of time. And if somebody is looking for what is a growth period over a period of time. So we're going to understand various terminologies like what is an epic and what is a scrum team, how does a sprint planning happens. And there are a lot of terminologies like people talk about team velocity, team capacity, then how we are going to do about the overall sprint planning and how do we do an estimation. There are different techniques like, uh, generally, people try to do an estimation by taking up a task, trying to give a couple of hours, like, based on your knowledge of how many hours this task will take. Somebody says, let's say it's going to take 10 hours, and somebody says it's going to take like 4 hours. And then we will have a good debate in the sprint planning. Why is he thinking 10 hours and why is he thinking like 4 hours? And then we'll get onto a common understanding from all the scenarios so that we don't miss out anything. And then we'll arrive at a right estimation that is for the corresponding tasks. So we're going to talk about more of the sprint planning, how it happens and how task detailing is going to happen. Then we'll talk about, the different, of course, this is not the order, just the words or the kind of words that are going to be or terminologies that are going to be used in the agile model. So we'll talk about user story, how a user story is written. We'll talk about some examples of them. And then in case of a daily stand-up meeting, so since it's an agile, it's only a 2-week sprint or a week sprint. Team gets to meet every day for a quick 10 to 15 minutes of meeting called stand-up meeting, and where they talk about what they have done yesterday and what are they planning to do today. And if there are any roadblocks, they'll inform the Scrum Master, and Scrum Master will try to reach out to the corresponding person and try to unblock them so that they can proceed. So we'll go into each of these more and more detail. Uh, we'll also even understand the acceptance criteria, which is more important from a QA point of view. Tester needs to have a very detailed understanding of, you cannot really accept any user story without having a proper acceptance criteria. Basically, acceptance criteria will tell you how the system should behave when it is developed, and that will become an expected behavior for the application. So it's very important from a QA point of view. So any questions so far before I move on and kind of talk about the remaining things? I don't want to just make it like one way. If you have any questions, of course, we'll have a good 5 to 10 minutes of discussion towards the end as well, but just in case. Any questions? First of all, is the kind of rhythm and the whole context is clear? Is everybody following? Team quick yes no will help. Okay, cool. All right. So then we'll talk about software testing lifecycle as such. As an individual QA, you need to know some of the important terminologies in the testing, like what exactly a test plan. Uh, there's a lot of misconception going around. People say it's an agile software development, so we don't need to write a test plan or we don't need to go for a detailed documentation. It's not very true. Uh, Without planning, getting into an execution is not at all a right idea. So even if it is just one pager, of course, previously we used to write a good document of 3 to 4 pages of very detailed explanation of what is the objective of this project, what is the scope of this project, and what is out of scope from it, what are the deliverables, who are my customers, and what is my test management tool, defect management tool. I'll give some samples of test planning. You don't need to do that detail, but what is most important is, I can say just one liner is that at least you need to have a test strategy of how you're going to test it. For example, this product is going to go for different operating systems, different browsers, and the mobile applications. and again in the mobile applications, Android, iOS, and with a different version. So what is your strategy? How you're going to test it? How you're going to ensure that you're not leaving any bugs into production? So that strategy needs to be defined, and it's very, very important. You go for any interview, it's definitely a question. So they'll give you a kind of requirement. They'll give you some project requirement from their web application or a mobile application or an API, and they would ask you to come up with the kind of strategy how you will actually go about testing it. And it is a very definite question that is expected for the people who have more than 2 to 3 years of experience. But no wonder, even if they ask any fresher, if you just say that I'm trying to get into an IT also, and just say that I have been trained on the QA, so they'll still expected or curious to know how good strategies you can make it. So we're going to talk about the test planning or test strategy, and then we'll understand what is test design or development. So here basically writing the test cases, creating the test cases, creating test scenarios first. Based on the user story given to you, you will come up with the different user scenarios, how this feature is going to be used. For example, let's say a feature like different scenarios on the payment gateway system. For example, somebody is going to make a payment to an online application, and there are different ways of making the payments using wallets, credit card, debit card, net banking. So you will come up with the different user scenarios for that, and then each of the user scenario will have very detailed test cases as well, like both positive and negative. For example, if I just say making through a credit card, then you will have a valid credit card number, invalid credit card number scenarios, having sufficient balance, insufficient balance, expiry date, non-expiry date, card number and the name matching, not matching, and if there is any a one-time password that's going to be generated, that's matching, not matching. So you'll get into a lot of detailed test cases as well. So basically all these things are going to be very important for from a validation of the application point of view. And unless you sit and write all of these before the application is given to you or before the development completes, it is not easy to think of all these things dynamically during the testing. And it's not a good idea as well. It's just like, at least you need to have, even if you're an expert in the application, it's okay to sit and write one liner of titles saying like, this is a test case that I'm going to validate. And it's most important for the reason that you're not going to miss out anything. And you will have more confidence on what are all that I have validated and how I can confidently sign off it. So that's the core job of a tester, is to write the test cases before you get into an execution. And again, when you go for an interview, so a lot of times people give you scenario, people give you an application, and they would expect you to come up with the test cases in the interview, in the half an hour interview that you have, or 45 minutes of interview that you have. And more importantly, what they will look for is the normal general cases that anybody will give, even if not somebody really trained on QA side also will actually go try to give some positive scenarios. But they will look at from you the kind of end-to-end scenarios that you're going to provide, to the corners of what are the possible scenarios that can happen. We generally call them as edge cases. So how many edge cases that you can bring up, and how many positive and negative, so equal importance, right? How much equal importance that you're giving to how much importance that you're giving to the positive, you should give equal importance to the negative. And more importantly, not just functional, how you can go more detail about non-functional, like in terms of security point of view, in terms of accessibility point of view, in terms of performance point of view. And so getting into a lot of other non-functional GUI point of view, how whether the user interface is like user friendly or not, checking from that, and checking from an accessibility perspective, because nowadays all the applications are available to all kinds of people, people with the color blind, people with the low vision, everybody should be able to use our application. So how how you're actually going to take care of such scenarios. And of course, negativity is very important. Like, what if somebody tries to do, not wantedly, but accidentally, if somebody tries to do a scenario, how responsive is our system. So all that is going to be very important, and this is where we are going to spend a good amount of time taking up a project and writing the test cases, positive, negative, functional, non-functional. Just to give you an idea, there are many different testing techniques. We're going to just kind of walk you through the list of them. Like, it starts with a unit testing, which is of course always done by development team. You're not going to do this, but you will still, yeah, we'll just define this and then we'll move forward. But there are a lot of things that you are going to do. It is like integration testing, and again in the integration we have like a top-down up integration testing. We have like a bottom-up integration testing. So we'll talk about them. And then we have like a system testing or an end-to-end testing. Then we'll talk about what is functional testing, load testing, performance testing, a stress testing, a GUI testing, accessibility, a regression testing. And these are all actually same. Sanity or smoke is same. Sanity testing or smoke testing, and things related to security testing, database testing, exploratory testing, compatibility testing on different operating system browsers and devices. And then we have a separate category called API testing. Today, everything is like a service-oriented architecture. Whatever the softwares that we develop or systems that we develop, one system will be calling the another system, right? So in that model, software-oriented architecture will come into picture, and that's when the application programming interface and services testing come into picture. So how do you go about testing the APIs? Typically, you need to be very clear about the architecture of your project, and most of the software systems will have this architecture. So you'll have a GUI on top, whether the UI can be generated in any front-end technology, like you might have heard about CSS plus HTML combination, or it could be an ASP.NET, or it could be a Java, right? And then you will have a middleware. This is where the business logic is written for the application. And then you will have a database layer. And so when a user makes a request from the GUI, it goes to the middle layer and try to get the required information from the database layer, then connect back to the middle layer and try to provide the information back to the user on top of it. And of course, there are other scenarios where nowadays it's very important is like, where you're going to host all these things. Is it like on-premise, or you're going to use any cloud technologies? So all that definitely matters. But before even make it things more complicated, let's try to understand this simple scenario. So when you have the GUI, middle layer, and data layer, you need to have your testing strategy separated for how do you do it for database layer testing, how do you do it for middle layer testing, and how do you do it for GUI testing, and then how do you do for your end-to-end testing. So this is exactly when we talk about the middle layer or business layer, the APIs will come into picture, and without having a UI, you will just have an API, and the API will be connecting to the database to get the required information and response back. So how do you do about this API testing? And let's assume it's an agile that we have been talking about. It goes on an incremental basis. This sprint or an iteration, let's say your team is going to build only database. So you need to have your testing only for the database. And the next sprint, let's say a middle layer will be ready, then you need to have a testing for this. And in the next sprint, let's say the GUI is going to be ready, then you need to have a testing around the GUI. And that next sprint may be a complete end-to-end testing that you're going to do it. And then the idea is that these all components, the database, the middle layer, they're not actually putting it on an on-premise. Let's say they are using some cloud technology. So how you're going to connect to those cloud systems, and you're going to validate them, right? So even if somebody wants to do it, for example, if I wanted to go on different operating systems and browsers, previously we used to procure the hardware and operating systems for all these machines. For example, if my application is going to go on Windows, Unix, Linux, and Macintosh with the different browser combinations. So previously for testing of these, we used to order the physical machines, and all the physical machines we used to set it up in the test lab and install the software which we are developing it on all of these combinations. And then we used to come up with a test matrix like, okay, these are the operating systems that I'm going to test, and these are the browsers that I'm going to test. So one side will take operating systems, and one side will take like browsers, and then we'll come up with a test matrix like, on Windows 10 with IE 11, yeah, it's working fine. Windows 10 with a Chrome version, let's say it's failing, and Windows 10 with Safari, it's working fine. So like that, we used to derive at a test matrix and ensure all these combinations are tested. This is still valid. The matrix which I'm talking about and checking is still valid, but what is most critical in today's world, and nobody's obviously doing it, is ordering the physical machines, because it's very costly, and we don't need to do it with the based on the cloud technologies that we have around. All you go do about is like you go into Microsoft Azure or you go into AWS from Amazon. Of course, that your team decides and your project management decides. You go order, basically spin out some machines that are required with the combinations, and then you will test your applications on that. So we need to see based on what is your project requirement and how we're going to do it. So these are the different techniques. We'll talk more about the cloud, and of course, when we go into automation, obviously we'll use some browser stack and source labs, etc. So the different test design development, and then executing it on all those combinations of your test environments, as just now I talked about it. Then that will obviously expect you to do an analysis of the results, whether they are getting passed, failed, whether they are working as expected, not as expected. Anything that is not as expected, obviously you'll go create the defects. So we call it like a defect tracking, defect management. Again, some of the defect management tools like JIRA, Bugzilla, these are some of the tools that are going to play a major role while doing that. And when you track the defects, and there is one important activity that happens is called defect triaging or defect management. So in fact, it's we are going to initiate as a QA, because you identify a lot of bugs and they're just lying there. No developer or nobody is looking at them. So you will initiate a meeting among the project management team, the dev team, and the rest of the QAs in your organization. You will initiate a triage meeting and go through each of the bug. Ideally, PM is expected to do, and the PM will categorize them. Of course, whether it's first of all a defect or not. If it is a defect, then what is the kind of severity of it? Like, is it a so we're going to talk about all these things in detail. So what is the severity of that? Is it a severity 1 or a 2 or a 3 or a 4 issue? And what is the priority of this issue? Like, how urgent it is required for the client? Is it very urgent, or like, can it wait for the next sprint or next iteration? So all this is going to be discussed during the defect triaging or defect management. And based on the priority, they will go about fixing of that. And your job will end along, by sending out a report on a daily basis or a weekly basis. These are the different modules that I have tested. These are the different testing techniques that I have followed. And these are the different test cases passed, failed, or sometimes a test case might be blocked for a reason that, that feature is not working on a particular combination. So you'll report all of that. So even reporting is very important from a QA point of view. So any questions? These are all, each activity you have to understand in detail. How does a test strategy needs to be generated, test development, execution, result analysis, etc. At a high level, the testing methodologies can be categorized into three, like black box, white box, and gray box. Anybody heard about these? Any idea? Heard of black box testing, white box testing, and gray box testing? What's a one-liner that you know? So the high-level difference is that so a lot of times, again, this is you need to be very clear where you're going to apply for the jobs and all. Um, if you consider your software system like this, and there are different technologies used in it, as I just now explained you, there is a front-end technology, and there is a middle layer technology, and there is a database technology. Let's assume it's all like .NET, and they're using some MVC, and let's say there is a SQL server in the back. Now, you being a test engineer, you will have a natural question like how much I need to know from a .NET MVC perspective and how much I need to know from this SQL perspective to validate this system. So that answers the question based on what method that you're going to choose. In case of a black box technology or a black box testing method, it is still okay even if you don't know anything about .NET and MVC. For that matter, even if you don't know anything about SQL, but generally expectations are rising every day. So people would expect you to have some knowledge on the back end for sure, SQL for sure. But on the .NET and MVC, even if you don't have an idea, that is still fine because uh, all you're going to do is majorly functional testing. You're going to validate all the functional scenarios, whether they are working or not, non-functional scenarios like performance, security, accessibility, as I told you, all those things you're going to verify, but you're not going to really verify from a code perspective how these classes are defined, how these methods are defined, how this model view controller is connecting to my front end. That is what you're not going to verify, and it is not really required because on the developer side also we have some of the best practices that when multiple developers are working, we would expect developer one to write the code and then do a self review of his code and then do a peer review with another developer, and then there is a unit testing that he is supposed to do. So there are already good amount of things are already happening from a developer's perspective, and we wanted to leverage this QA or this particular test engineer in the way that he is going to verify all functional scenarios, non-functional scenarios end to end, but not from a code point of view. And that methodology is called black box methodology. And the name is also very self-explanatory. If you take a complete black shaded box, you cannot really see anything inside it. It's because it's not transparent, and that's the idea behind the black box methodology. And 70% of the jobs that you see in the market are majorly black box testing jobs, where they would not expect you to be master in the code. And especially if you're going to work in black box testing with manual testing alone, then I would say even if you do not have any programming knowledge, that will be sufficient. Still, you will have a job because your domain is expert. And I'm seeing the people from accounts background. They are doing an excellent job in validating the accounting related systems or financial related systems than a software guy or than a computer science graduate. Similarly, let's say there is a healthcare domain product. Somebody who worked in that healthcare domain or coming from the science background is actually doing better than the computer science background. So this is the area, and 70% of the jobs are from this category. This is not the only thing, but in some cases, some companies, like most of the critical products and product-based companies like Microsoft, Google, they would recruit bit more of a white box testing people for the reason that they would expect their QA to be expert in code level as well and go and do the product. It's more of a low level platform testing, and anything that's written in like C, C++ or a device level or operating system level, kernel level. They don't have much of the UI to test it, and they should have more of a scripting, the kind of, for example, if something that we're developing in an Android basis, they should be an expert in all the Android commands to go and run through command level and perform the validation, not from a UI. So that kind of testing is more of a white box testing where it's like a transparent. You can totally see the box completely, in and outside. It's like completely transparent. But that kind of jobs, to be frank, are like, around 20%. Only the core product-based companies which works at the kernel level, low level, platform level, they would need all that expectations. And then you'll find some 10% of jobs which are a combination of these. They would expect you to do white box testing as needed, and they would expect you to do black box testing as majorly. So you'll find some 10% of jobs like that. So you need to be clear on what is the category that you belongs to, and what is a category that you want to apply. So if you go through any job description, you'll understand it better. They will very clearly say we are looking for a white box test engineer who is an expert in the Java or Python or corresponding scripting language only needs to apply. Then probably if you're not expert in that category, then you should not look for that. But if they have not mentioned anything, that is specifically if they say we are looking for a good functional test engineer with the domain of enterprise systems and having good domain and experience in different operating systems and browsers, familiar with the Unix commands, etc., then that's another category. Okay, so watch out for the clear job description anytime that you're applying, because you don't want to waste your efforts in applying for a wrong position and expecting a call or anything like that. For that matter, actually, even this is important. A lot of people go and apply for the wrong position. There are a lot of jobs out saying as a quality assurance QA, but that is not testing job. Is it sounds weird or is okay? It says quality assurance engineer, but they are not test engineer jobs. Actually, QA is very different. QA is quality assurance, and what is testing is quality control. So we are actually QC, not QA. But nobody uses. Let me tell you, like it's a very 90% of the people use a level. I mean, even we say that I'm a principal QA engineer, I'm a senior QA engineer, or I'm a QA engineer. What you do is actually a QC. Probably I'll define more on tomorrow as the first thing, but I can give you one liner. QA people are like quality assurance people. Okay, somebody's saying something. Okay, sure. Who's this? Okay, is it Karthik? Sure, sure. Yeah, Karthik, I'll do that. So, what I'm saying that when it comes to quality assurance, it's more like defining the process for the project, defining the process for the organization. They are more of defining what methodology and what project management model that they have to follow. They are more like preventing the defects before software gets developed. But the QC is the actual one that we people that you're trying to learn will identify the jobs. You'll identify the defects in the system. So it's very different, and but a lot of people use this as QA. So again, unless you go through the description and understand what is this role, then you're actually applying for a wrong position. Even today, when I look at managerial jobs also, there are a lot of times they say quality assurance engineering manager, and when I go into the description, they say you should be an expert in setting up the process for the overall project management. You should have experience in Six Sigma, Green Belt, Black Belt, or you should have organizational certifications like CMM model certifications. So when you see these kind of things, that is not really the actual testing and validation kind of a management job. It is a QA job, quality assurance job. So we'll talk more about this. I'll try to define the differences. So it's very different. So please look into the descriptions when you're applying for the jobs. Otherwise, you're actually applying for a wrong one. All right, so kind of these are the things we'll go more in detail apart from what we have already provided here in terms of like, talking through AnyAUT, test management tool, JIRA, Trello. These are the things we're going to use it for a practical point of view for writing the test cases for planning our activities. All right, so Karthik is there on the line, so I'll just unmute for Karthik so that he will have few words. Hey, Karthik.
Hi, Shankar. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, good.
All right, awesome. Thank you. Hi, team. Hello, everyone. Joined as an attendee, so I really cannot see who all joined. But this is great start. I think we have kind of oriented ourselves to what the QA is required in today's testing and automation world. what are the things to learn and how do we cover them. So we will continue to do this daily. Shankar will be the co-trainer for manual testing and the automation as well, Selenium. And I'm doing the Java training on the side. So look at the schedule, look at what things are going, and I'm glad you all could interact and join in. So Shankar, just wanted to say hello, and this is good start. Let's continue with day 2 tomorrow then. And we also have the automation training after this, correct?
Yeah, we do have in 5 minutes from now.
All right. Can I go back to that document that you were making once and just thought I'll
Sure.
look at it from top to bottom once? Looks to be, so we're talking QA fundamentals, QA QC, SDLC, STLC, methodologies, types of testings, and how do we design test cases, defect tracking, right? That's what we're trying to say. And how do we do defect and test reporting? Agile as a cycle. Wow, okay, cool. We spoke about that a lot. And stand-up meetings, user stories. Yep, epics. All's good. Agile testing methodologies. Nice testing techniques. Verification and validation. Functional, non-functional.
Here to speak actually, but yeah, just to want to ensure it's there.
And as part of this, it's almost becoming like common. Some of these projects or companies have mobile applications as independent, but some could be more like hybrid platforms. So team focus a lot when you're training, while we're teaching all this, how to do this on mobile applications as well. A lot of projects come up on mobile app testing. Cool. So we're talking defects, prioritizing, builds, and okay. Triage meetings, priority. Nice, very nice, Shankar. So we're going to take it into a very practical driven approach. How do we do each of them? Shankar is going to walk you through. So I'm glad. Look forward to this now.
Cool.
Great.
All right.
Thank you.
So yeah, team, if there are any questions, just let us know quickly in the chat. If not, we're going to start in detailed sessions from tomorrow. Just want to wait for 1 or 2 minutes to see if there are any questions. All right, team. So if there are no questions, we'll pause it for here today. We'll continue with the QA fundamentals tomorrow. Cool. Thanks,
Thank you,
Ashvi.
Shankar.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
See you soon. Bye.